Welcome to the world of science fiction, where extraordinary tales come to life. Enjoy the journey. Golden dust swirled through the air of Zaria's ancient Colosseum, catching the light of three setting suns. Eric Carlane tasted metal and incense on his tongue as he inhaled deeply, calming his racing heart. The thunderous roar of the crowd pressed against his eardrums, thousands of alien spectators baying for blood. His blood, most likely. He flexed his fingers inside his battle-scarred gauntlets, noting the microfractures in the left index servo. One more thing to worry about. One more variable to track. Human challenger, step forward. The announcement boomed in 6 languages through the massive arena. Eric recognized only 3 of them. He strode from the shadowed alcove into the full glare of the arena. His armor, once the gleaming pride of Earth's special interstellar forces, now bore the marks of 100 battles across 17 worlds. The chest plate had been welded 3 times. The shield generator flickered intermittently, but the sword, an ancestral blade retrofitted with quantum edge technology, remained flawless. The crowd's jeering intensified. A shower of debris, food containers, betting tokens, and what appeared to be shed exoskeletons rained down around him. A human? Again? A tentacled spectator leaned over the barricade. 10 credits says he doesn't last 30 seconds. Eric ignored the taunts, scanning the arena instead. Diameter, approximately 70 meters. Surface, crushed stone over magnetized plates, designed to amplify impact forces. 6 entry points, all sealed except the one he'd emerged from. And directly opposite him, elevated 20 meters on a platform of carved obsidian, sat the throne. The throne held his opponent, Tessa, the undefeated champion of Zaria, the violet-skinned warrior who had slaughtered 300 challengers without sustaining a single meaningful injury. She reclined on her obsidian seat with practiced indolence, silver hair spilling over shoulders that gleamed like polished metal. Her storm-gray eyes followed Eric's movements with predatory interest. Her perfect lips curled in what might have been amusement or contempt. Pulsating chains of living light coiled around her wrists and ankles, connecting to a massive spherical weight that rested beside the throne, a metal ball the size of a human head, resembling an ancient cannonball. Her restraints were both prison and symbol, the visible manifestation of her status as the living seal. Eric analyzed her posture, the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her right hand rested closer to her weapon than her left. All useful data. Spectators of the 17 allied systems, the arena announcer's voice boomed. Behold today's challenger, Eric Carlane of Earth, a planet so insignificant most star charts don't even bother to include it anymore. Laughter rippled through the stands. The announcer continued, and defending her title for the 301st time, the mistress of mortality, the living seal, the unbreakable, Tessa. The crowd erupted into frenzied adoration. Tessa stood, the chains at her wrists and ankles slithering like sentient creatures as she moved to the edge of her platform. The massive metal sphere followed, hovering slightly above the ground as if it weighed nothing at all. Unusual restriction parameters for a gladiator of her caliber, Eric muttered to himself, cataloging the detail. Either ceremonial or something more significant. Tessa raised a hand and the crowd fell silent with unnerving immediacy. The one who defeats me shall claim me, she announced, her voice carrying a melodic accent that slid between the syllables like liquid silver. Body, soul, destiny. Under her breath, she added something that sounded like Krivon, a word Eric couldn't place in any of the 12 languages he spoke. The audience responded with renewed fervor, some spectators actually climbing over each other to get closer to the barrier. This is the 301st challenge. The announcer's voice quivered with excitement. "And shall likely end as all others have, with another corpse to feed the composter pits." Eric rolled his shoulders, activating his armor's emergency medical protocols. Not that they'd help much against what was coming. A hovering platform detached from beneath Tessa's throne, carrying her down to arena level. The massive metal sphere followed, bobbing gently behind her as she stepped onto the fighting ground. Up close, Eric could see that her violet skin wasn't merely colored but subtly textured, almost iridescent under the arena lights. "Human," she said, her voice now pitched only for him to hear. "Have you prepared your final words? I could transmit them to your homeworld, if I knew where that backwater rock still floated." Eric maintained his focus, analyzing rather than responding to the taunt. Her stance revealed combat training from at least 3 different systems. The way she moved suggested enhanced reflexes. The metal sphere, clearly heavier than it appeared, seemed to cause her no encumbrance whatsoever. "No last words?" Tessa cocked her head. "How disappointing. Most beg for mercy before we even begin." "I didn't come here to talk," Eric replied, drawing his sword. A smile played across her perfect features. "Number you came here to die." Without warning, Tessa launched forward, moving with such speed that the crowd's roar lagged behind her action. The massive metal sphere whipped through the air as if it were made of paper, connected to her by chains that glowed brighter with her movement. Eric barely managed to dodge, the sphere missing him by millimeters, close enough that he felt the displacement of air against his face. His enhanced reflexes, calibrated through years of combat, were barely sufficient. "She's faster than the reports indicated," he realized, pivoting to track her position. Tessa didn't pause, immediately redirecting the momentum of her weapon. The sphere reversed direction mid-air, defying physics as it hurtled back toward Eric from behind. He dropped to a crouch, feeling the rush of air as it passed overhead, then launched into a forward roll as Tessa herself followed, her foot striking the ground where he'd been an instant before. The crowd was going wild, their combined voices creating a physical pressure against Eric's ears. "Slow," Tessa taunted, her silver hair whipping around her face as she spun. "Even for a human." Energy crackled from her fingertips, lashing out in violet arcs. Eric raised his sword, the quantum edge absorbing the first blast. The second caught him in the shoulder, sending him staggering. Pain receptors screamed. Armor integrity at 72% and falling. He recalibrated, watching her movements with heightened perception. There, a pattern emerged. The metal sphere created momentum that she used to amplify her own attacks. But that connection worked both ways. Tessa attacked again, becoming a blur of violet and silver. The sphere whipped around in a complex orbit, each pass forcing Eric to adjust his position. As she closed in, he noticed her nostrils flare slightly. Her rhythm faltered. Just a microsecond's hesitation. Interesting. She recovered immediately, launching a devastating combination of energy blasts and physical strikes, driving him back toward the arena wall. The sphere whirled in increasingly tight circles, creating a cage of motion from which escape seemed impossible. "Is this truly the best Earth has to offer?" Tessa called out, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I expected at least a minute of entertainment." The crowd laughed, already anticipating the kill. Eric tracked the pattern of the sphere, calculating trajectories and timing. When Tessa moved in for what should have been the finishing strike, he executed his counter. Instead of retreating, he stepped directly into her attack path, the one vector the sphere couldn't cover without striking her as well. Tessa's eyes widened in surprise as Eric moved through her guard, his sword a flash of blue-white energy. She twisted away, impossibly fast, but in avoiding his blade, she altered the sphere's path. It swung wide, the chain momentarily slack. Eric seized that millisecond of opportunity. He caught the chain with his left hand, ignoring the searing pain as the living energy burned through his gauntlet, and pulled with all his enhanced strength. Tessa, unprepared for this strategy, lost her balance. Eric followed through with a sweeping kick that took her legs from under her. As she fell, he executed an impossible leap that even his combat instructors would have declared beyond human capability. Time seemed to slow. He calculated every variable: her rate of descent, the position of the sphere, the tension in the chain, the distribution of her weight. His body responded with perfect precision, landing atop her and pinning her to the ground, his blade at her throat. The sphere crashed down beside them, embedding itself in the arena floor. Silence fell across the Colosseum. Tessa stared up at him, storm-gray eyes wide with shock, and something else. Curiosity? Her chest rose and fell rapidly beneath him. Her violet skin flushed a deeper shade. "Impossible," she whispered. The arena seal flashed brilliant white, confirming what everyone could see but couldn't believe. Victory. Slowly, mechanically, Tessa lowered her gaze. "Master," she said, the word bitter on her tongue. "Command me." Eric stood carefully, never taking his eyes from her. The silence in the arena persisted for 3 more heartbeats before erupting into chaos. Spectators screamed accusations of cheating. Officials conferred frantically. Security drones deployed from ceiling hatches. "Get up," Eric said quietly to Tessa. She rose with fluid grace, the chains at her wrists and ankles now glowing with a different quality of light. The massive sphere lifted from its impact crater, once again following her like an obedient pet. "We need to leave," Eric told her, noting the increasing agitation in the stands. "Now." Tessa's gaze swept over the crowd, then returned to his face. Her lips curved into a sardonic smile. "As you wish, Krivon," she replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "What does that mean?" Eric asked, already moving toward the nearest exit, tracking multiple potential threats among the arena guards. "It means tedious one in my language," she answered with a mischievous glint in her eye. "Get used to it. You've claimed my service, not my respect." Eric didn't waste breath arguing. Arena officials were shouting into communication devices. 2 security checkpoints had already locked down. "Is there another way out?" he asked. Tessa studied him for a moment, seeming to assess his worth all over again. "Follow me," she finally decided. "But stay close. My new master wouldn't survive 10 seconds without me in this place." Tessa led Eric through a network of maintenance tunnels beneath the arena, her metallic sphere grinding against the narrow walls as they navigated the cramped passageways. The distant sounds of chaos faded behind them: angry spectators, security alerts, the frantic shouting of arena officials. "They're sealing the primary exits," Eric observed, mapping their route in his mind. 3 lefts, 1 right, descending at approximately 12 degrees. "How far does this tunnel extend?" "Far enough to keep you alive for another hour, Master." The title dripped with contempt. Tessa glanced back at him, silver hair catching the dim emergency lighting. "Though I'm still calculating the probability that your victory wasn't pure luck." Eric studied her movements, the subtle shift of her weight, the perfect balance despite the irregular footing, the way the chains at her wrists and ankles adjusted with each step. Not restraints, he realized, extensions. Luck had nothing to do with it. A harsh laugh escaped her. 300 warriors before you, some with enhanced strength that could crush starship hulls, others with precognitive abilities. She stopped abruptly, turning to face him. All dead. Yet a human with damaged armor and a retrofitted sword survived. Eric met her storm-gray eyes. "Perhaps they didn't see what I saw." "And what was that?" "The pattern. The moment when your sphere creates momentum that pulls you off balance for precisely 0.37 seconds. The gap in your left side defense when you initiate an energy blast. Tessa's eyes narrowed. Impossible. No one can track my movement patterns that quickly. I did. For a moment, genuine curiosity replaced the hostility in her expression. She leaned slightly closer, her nostrils flaring subtly as she inhaled. "What are you?" she whispered, then seemed to catch herself. She stepped back, resuming her pace along the tunnel. "Never mind. My transport bay is ahead. Unless you'd prefer to stay and explain to the Zarian officials why their champion is now obligated to follow you." The tunnel opened into a small hangar bay housing a sleek craft unlike any Eric had seen. Matte black with violet accents, its hull curved in organic patterns that suggested both beauty and deadliness. "Impressive," he said, recognizing technology beyond Earth's capabilities. "My shadow rift." Tessa approached the ship, which responded to her presence by illuminating soft violet running lights. The entry ramp extended silently. "A champion's privilege. Now, yours by conquest, I suppose." Eric followed her aboard, scanning the interior as they entered. Double pilot configuration. Weapon systems integrated directly into the control interface. Engines of unfamiliar design but clearly high-powered. "Where are we going?" he asked as Tessa took the pilot's seat, her chains flowing like liquid as she settled into position. The metal sphere anchored itself to a specialized dock beside her. "Wherever you command, Master." She glanced sideways at him. "Though I'd recommend leaving this system immediately. The Zarian elite guard doesn't appreciate losing their prized champion." Even as she spoke, alarm klaxons blared throughout the hangar. Heavy security doors began closing at the exit. "Go," Eric said simply, strapping himself into the co-pilot's seat. Tessa's hands danced across the controls. The ship lifted smoothly, then accelerated with shocking force, pinning Eric against his seat. They shot through the narrowing gap of the hangar doors with centimeters to spare, emerging into Zaria's crimson twilight. "Pursuit craft launching," Tessa announced calmly, as though discussing the weather. 8 vessels, military grade." Eric studied the tactical display. "Can we outrun them? We can outrun anything." A fierce smile played across her perfect features. "Hold tight, Krivon." The shadow rift plunged into a series of maneuvers that would have torn apart lesser ships, skimming the surface of massive towers before shooting upward at an impossible angle. G-forces pressed against Eric's chest despite the ship's compensation systems. The pursuing craft fell behind, unable to match their velocity as Tessa guided them toward the upper atmosphere. Within minutes, Zaria's 3 suns shrank to distant points of light, and the blackness of space enveloped them. "Entering slip space," Tessa announced. "Destination?" Eric considered their options. "The nearest regional arena." She raised an eyebrow. "Interesting choice. Glutton for punishment? Strategic necessity." "The Tornith Arena, then. 7 hours in slip space." She initiated the jump sequence, then released the controls as automated systems took over. The stars outside stretched into lines, then vanished entirely. Turning to face him fully, Tessa unfastened her harness and stood. In the confined space of the cockpit, her presence seemed to fill every available centimeter. The violet of her skin contrasted sharply with the metallic sheen of her flight suit, which clung to her perfect form with engineered precision. "Would Master like me to fetch some refreshment?" she asked, her voice a deliberate purr. She leaned closer, close enough that Eric could feel her breath against his face. "Or, perhaps, something more intimate?" Eric maintained his composure, analyzing her behavior. Test of boundaries, attempt to establish dominance through discomfort or distraction. "Water will be fine," he replied evenly. Frustration flashed in her eyes for an instant before she masked it with practiced indifference. As you wish. As she moved toward the ship's galley, Eric closed his eyes, allowing himself a moment to process the day's events. The image of his father materialized unbidden behind his eyelids. Rain lashed the ruins of what had once been San Francisco. 16-year-old Eric crouched among the toppled remains of the Golden Gate Bridge, his breath fogging in the cold air as he tracked the patrol drone's movement pattern. "Too tense," his father murmured beside him. "You're anticipating the attack before it comes." "What's wrong with being prepared?" Eric whispered back. "Nothing. But there's preparation, and there's telegraphing your intentions." His father's weathered hand reached out, adjusting Eric's stance minutely. "See the pattern in everything. Breathe with it. Then, when you move—" The drone pivoted suddenly, its sensors sweeping toward their position. In one fluid motion, his father rose, threw a disruption charge, and dropped back into cover, all while the drone was mid-scan. "Become part of the pattern," his father finished as the drone crashed to the ground. "That's how humans survived when the others came. Not with superior technology, with superior perception." Eric opened his eyes as Tessa returned, 2 containers of water floating beside her on small anti-grav units. "You were thinking of something unpleasant," she observed, handing him one of the containers. "Your heart rate increased by 7%. "You can detect that?" She tapped one elegant finger against her temple. "Enhanced senses, part of the champion package." Eric sipped the water, which tasted faintly of minerals unfamiliar to Earth. "Tell me about the arenas." "What's to tell?" "Rich beings enjoy watching warriors kill each other. Tale as old as civilization." "But you're different," Eric pressed. "The living seal, they called you." "What does that mean?" Tessa's expression closed off. "It means I serve a purpose, one that doesn't concern a human from a dying world." "Everything concerns a human from a dying world," Eric replied quietly, "especially purposes that might prevent more worlds from dying." Something flickered in her eyes, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. She studied him with renewed intensity. "You're not what I expected," she admitted finally. "What did you expect?" "The others who defeated champions, rare as they were, became tyrants, demanded subservience, used their victory as license for cruelty." Her voice hardened. "I've seen it 97 times across 3 centuries. Eric processed this information. "You're 300 years old?" 347, if you're counting." She smiled without warmth. "The living seal doesn't age conventionally." The ship hummed around them as they traveled through slip space. Eric felt the weight of her gaze, calculating and wary. "Get some rest," she suggested eventually. "Tornith Arena doesn't welcome humans warmly. You'll need your strength." The Tornith Arena rose from the desert plains of Kellex Prime like an ancient monument to violence. 6 massive pillars supported a retractable dome that currently stood open to the harsh sunlight, casting long shadows across the rust-colored sand. Eric and Tessa approached on foot, having landed the shadow rift several kilometers away to avoid detection. The heat pressed against them like a physical force as they traversed the barren landscape. "Champion approaching!" shouted the guardians at the arena entrance, dropping immediately to one knee as they recognized Tessa. Their eyes, 4 to each humanoid face, widened when they saw Eric walking beside her rather than behind. "This human is my new master," Tessa announced formally, though Eric detected the edge in her voice. "He seeks audience with the Tornith champion." The guards exchanged alarmed glances before one rose shakily to its feet. "But this is irregular. A human claiming the living seal? The Galactic Council must be notified." "The Galactic Council can go supernova for all I care," Tessa interrupted. Arena law supersedes council bureaucracy. Now open the damn gate before I open you." The guards hastily complied, unbarring the massive stone doors that led into the arena complex. As they passed through shadowed corridors adorned with engravings of past victories, Eric noticed a shift in Tessa's behavior. Her usual sardonic demeanor hardened into something more formal, almost ritualistic. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked quietly. She glanced at him, then quickly away. "Everything, Krivon. That's the point." They were escorted to a chamber deep beneath the arena, a circular room lined with ancient texts inscribed on what appeared to be sheets of hammered gold. Dust covered every surface except a central pedestal that held a crystal sphere. "Wait here," their escort instructed before departing. Eric immediately moved to examine the inscriptions, recognizing linguistic elements from a dozen different cultures spanning thousands of years. "This is a library," he realized aloud. "More like a tomb," Tessa replied, her chains jangling softly as she paced the circumference of the room. "These are the stories of worlds that no longer exist." Eric's fingers traced the symbols. These describe planetary reformation, ecosystem regeneration, atmospheric recalibration. He turned to her. "This is technological knowledge far beyond what the Allied systems currently possess." "Yes," she agreed simply. "Knowledge deemed too dangerous for general dissemination." The pieces began assembling in Eric's mind. The arenas aren't just entertainment. Finally, catching up? Tessa leaned against one wall, arms crossed. "They're testing grounds, ancient ones." Eric continued scanning the texts, absorbing information at an accelerated rate. "There's an artifact mentioned repeatedly. The Void Crown." Tessa's posture stiffened. "Stop reading." "It says the crown can—" "I said stop." Her voice echoed through the chamber as she strode toward him, the metal sphere trailing ominously behind her. "Some knowledge isn't meant for humans." Eric stood his ground. "This artifact can regenerate dying worlds, restore dead ecosystems. Earth is already too far gone," she snapped. "The Void Crown isn't some magical fix-all. It's a complex, intelligent system that rebuilds worlds according to very specific parameters." "You were created to guard this artifact," Eric said, the final connections forming in his mind. Tessa's laugh was bitter. "Not guard. Contain." She avoided his gaze. "I am the living seal. If you truly claim me, break my will completely. The crown reveals itself." The implication settled over Eric like a physical weight. "You're the key." "I'm the lock," she corrected, "designed to prevent access except to those proven worthy through the arena system." Eric's mind raced with possibilities. Earth, broken, polluted, dying, could be restored. Billions of displaced humans could return home. But the cost? To access the crown, he began slowly, "I would need to—" "Break me," Tessa finished. "Not just defeat me in combat. Demolish my will, my essence, make me truly yours in every sense of the word." Her storm-gray eyes met his. Then, and only then, would the crown manifest. The silence between them felt heavy with implications neither wished to voice. "That explains why someone might want you back," Eric finally said, gesturing to the crystal sphere on the pedestal, which had begun pulsing with an internal light. "We're being tracked." Tessa whirled toward the sphere, cursing in a language Eric didn't recognize. "Quantum beacon. They're already here." She grabbed his arm. "We need to go. Now." The floor trembled beneath them as an explosion rocked the arena above. Dust showered from the ancient ceiling. "Who's they?" Eric asked, already calculating escape routes. "Everyone," Tessa answered grimly. "Cultists who worship the crown. Arena officials who believe I belong to the system, not to any individual." She pulled him toward a concealed exit. Your victory disrupted a very delicate balance of power. They sprinted through narrow tunnels as more explosions sounded behind them, emerging into blinding sunlight at the arena's rear. 3 armored figures awaited them, weapons drawn. Relinquish the seal, human, ordered their leader, a reptilian being whose scales gleamed like obsidian in the harsh light. She belongs to the arenas, not to some primate from a forgotten world. Eric assessed their opponents, enhanced combat armor, pulse weapons, tactical positioning suggesting professional military training. I belong to no one, Tessa snarled, her chains brightening as she readied for combat. The attack came with shocking speed. Energy blasts carved through the air where they had stood moments before. Eric rolled left while Tessa launched upward, her metal sphere whipping toward the nearest attacker with bone-crushing force. Eric drew his sword, the quantum edge humming to life as he parried a direct assault from the leader. The reptilian was fast, faster than any organic being should be. But Eric tracked the pattern of its movements, waiting for the telltale hesitation that preceded a shift in attack direction. There, a micro pause before a downward strike. Eric feinted right, then pivoted, driving his blade through a gap in the creature's armor. It screamed, a high-pitched sound that hurt Eric's ears before collapsing. Tessa dispatched the other 2 with brutal efficiency, her sphere smashing through one attacker's chest plate while she simultaneously delivered an energy blast that vaporized the 3rd assailant's head. More will come, she warned, barely winded from the exertion. We need to... The whistling sound of a projectile cut her off. Eric's enhanced reflexes registered the danger too late. The trajectory aimed directly at his heart. Tessa moved with impossible speed, inserting herself between Eric and the incoming threat. The projectile, a crystalline dart, embedded itself in her shoulder. She staggered, her face registering shock at her own action. "Why did you—" Eric began, steadying her. "I don't know," she whispered, staring at the wound in confusion. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed against him. Eric dragged Tessa back to the Shadow Rift, carrying her unconscious form through the desert wasteland while maintaining vigilance for additional attackers. The crystalline dart had embedded itself deeply in her shoulder, pulsing with an eerie blue light. "Hold on," he muttered, though he wasn't certain she could hear him. Once aboard the ship, he placed her on the medbay diagnostic platform. The Shadow Rift systems immediately began scanning her body, alien scripts scrolling across the display screens. "Unknown toxin detected," the ship's AI announced in a melodic voice. "Composition: synthetic neurotoxin with quantum entanglement properties, unable to neutralize." Eric studied the readouts, correlating the data with his limited knowledge of xenobiology. Is it fatal? Negative. The subject's unique physiology is neutralizing the toxin. Estimated recovery time, 14 standard hours. Relief washed through him, though he maintained his outward calm. Set course for the outer rim. Random jump pattern to prevent tracking. As the ship hummed to life around him, Eric removed his damaged armor, wincing at the burns and lacerations beneath. He treated his own wounds with medicated patches from the ship's supplies, then settled into a chair beside Tessa's unconscious form. Her silver hair spilled across the black medical platform, creating a stark contrast. Even unconscious, she maintained an aura of deadly grace, the chains at her wrists and ankles glowing with subdued light. The metal sphere had anchored itself to the floor nearby, as though standing guard. "What are you?" he whispered, studying the intricate patterns within her chains. Eric must have dozed off because he awakened to the sensation of being watched. Tessa's storm-gray eyes were open, observing him with an unreadable expression. "You carried me," she stated. "Yes. Why didn't you leave me? You could have taken the ship, gone anywhere." Eric considered her question. The bond created by your defeat links us. I need you to access the crown. She studied him for a long moment. Pragmatic, but not the complete truth. Before he could respond, she rose from the platform with surprising agility for someone recently poisoned. The movement brought her face close to his, and she inhaled deeply, her nostrils flaring as she caught his scent. Tessa froze, seemingly caught in an internal struggle. Then she pulled back abruptly, her expression hardening. "Course?" she asked, all business once more. "Outer rim. Random jumps," she nodded. "Good strategy. We should stay mobile for at least 3 standard days before approaching another arena." Over the next week, they traveled between remote outposts, gathering intelligence and supplies while avoiding major trade routes. 5 times they detected pursuit, 5 times Tessa's piloting skills and Eric's tactical planning allowed them to escape. Throughout their journey, Eric noticed Tessa's increasingly erratic behavior. He would awaken to find her standing over him in the darkness of his quarters, silently watching. During combat training, which she had grudgingly agreed to continue, she would sometimes stop mid-movement, her nostrils flaring as she caught his scent, before withdrawing with thinly veiled irritation. After one particularly close escape from bounty hunters on a mining colony, Eric found her in the ship's small bathing chamber, her face flushed a deeper purple than usual. "What's wrong with you?" he asked directly. "Nothing that concerns you, Krivon." She attempted to push past him in the confined space, but he stood his ground. "It concerns me if it affects our mission." Tessa's laugh held no humor. "Our mission? You want the crown to save your miserable planet. I want—" She trailed off, her eyes unfocused. "What do you want, Tessa?" For a moment, something vulnerable passed across her features. Then her walls slammed back into place. "I want you to move out of my way before I move you." Before he could respond, proximity alarms blared throughout the ship. "Dreadnought-class vessel approaching," the ship's AI announced. "Weapon systems active." They abandoned their confrontation, rushing to the cockpit. The tactical display showed a massive warship bearing down on their position, energy cannons charging. "Arena Enforcement Division," Tessa muttered, sliding into the pilot's seat. "They're not supposed to operate this far into the outer rim. Can we outrun them?" "We can try." Her hands flew across the controls, initiating evasive maneuvers even as she plotted a slipspace jump. "But they've locked on. This will be close." The shadow rift accelerated, pushing against the boundaries of its inertial dampeners. Behind them, the dreadnought opened fire, energy beams slicing through space where they had been moments before. "Jump in 5 seconds," Tessa announced tensely. The ship shuddered as a glancing hit struck their stern. Warning lights flashed across the console. "Slipspace drive damaged," the AI reported calmly. "Functionality at 62%. "Can we still jump?" Eric demanded. "Yes, but not far," Tessa replied, her focus absolute as she made minute adjustments to their course. "Hang on." The stars streaked and vanished as they entered slipspace, the damaged drive creating a rougher transition than usual. Eric gripped the arms of his seat as the ship bucked and trembled around them. When they emerged, a desert planet filled the view screen. "Kartep," Tessa identified. "Uninhabited except for research outposts, severe weather patterns." As if to confirm her assessment, the ship's sensors registered atmospheric disturbances ahead, a massive sandstorm spanning hundreds of kilometers. "Can we land?" Eric asked, already calculating their limited options. "We need to. The drive requires repairs before we can jump again." Tessa guided them toward the planet's surface. "I can use the storm for cover. They won't be able to track us through that interference." They descended through turbulent air currents, the ship fighting against increasingly powerful winds. Visibility dropped to near zero as they entered the sandstorm, forcing Tessa to rely entirely on instruments. With a bone-jarring impact, they touched down on the planet's surface. The howling of the storm enveloped them immediately, sand particles battering against the hull with relentless force. "We're safe for now," Tessa said, powering down non-essential systems. "But we're also trapped until the storm passes and we can repair the drive." Eric nodded, running quick calculations. "How long?" "The drive? 6 hours minimum. The storm?" She glanced at the sensor readings. "According to planetary data, at least 20 hours. A smile touched her lips. "Hope you enjoy close quarters, Krivan." The storm intensified as night fell on Kartep, forcing them to retreat to the ship's interior compartments as the exterior hull temperature fluctuated wildly. With life support systems running on minimal power to conserve energy, the ambient temperature inside the shadow rift dropped steadily. Eric sat cross-legged on the floor of the common area, eyes closed, regulating his body temperature through meditation techniques his father had taught him. "Cold is just information," his father said, sitting shirtless in the snow despite the sub-zero temperature. Teenage Eric shivered beside him, trying desperately not to show his discomfort. "It's telling your body what to do," his father continued. "But you can choose whether to listen. Focus on your core. Feel your heartbeat." "Why am I learning this?" Eric asked through chattering teeth. "Because someday you may face an enemy that can manipulate environment, heat, cold, pressure." His father's eyes held a distant look. "The ones who took Earth from us, they could do that, and worse." "What if I can't control it?" His father's weathered hand rested on Eric's shoulder. "When you find something worth fighting for, truly worth fighting for, your body will remember these lessons even if your mind forgets." Your heart rate slowed to 40 beats per minute. Eric opened his eyes to find Tessa watching him from the doorway, a thermal blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Despite the drop in temperature, her violet skin gleamed with a thin sheen of perspiration. "Temperature regulation technique," he explained. "You should try it. You're showing signs of thermal stress." "My metabolism runs differently than yours." She paced the small compartment. "The cold actually helps." Eric noted her restlessness, the way her eyes avoided meeting his, the rhythmic clenching and unclenching of her fists. "Something's bothering you. Has been for days. Nothing escapes your notice, does it?" Her tone was mocking but lacked its usual edge. "It's how I stay alive." Tessa stopped pacing, standing directly before him. In the dim emergency lighting, her silver hair captured and refracted the scant illumination. The metal sphere hovered silently behind her, casting long shadows across the bulkhead. "You want to know what's bothering me?" she asked, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Your scent. It's maddening." She knelt before him, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her body. "My people can sense compatibility through pheromones. I've been fighting it since the arena." Eric maintained his composure, though his pulse quickened. "Why fight it? Because it makes no sense." Frustration colored her words. "You're human. I'm designed to resist conquest, not—" She gestured between them. "Not this. Yet here we are." "Yes," she agreed softly. "Here we are." The ship creaked around them as the storm intensified, sand particles striking the hull like miniature bullets. In the confined space, with reduced life support and the howling tempest outside, the universe seemed to contract to just the two of them. Tessa leaned forward, her silver hair falling around them like a curtain. "One night," she whispered. "One night where I'm not the living seal and you're not my master. Just two beings in a storm." Eric reached up, brushing a strand of hair from her face, noting how she instinctively leaned into his touch. "Is that what you want?" "What I want hasn't mattered for 3 centuries," she replied, her storm-gray eyes holding his. "What do you want, Eric Carlane of Earth?" Before he could answer, the proximity alarm blared once more, a different tone this time, indicating immediate danger. They both reacted instantly, years of combat training taking over. Eric rolled away from Tessa just as the hull breach charges detonated, blowing a section of the ship's side inward. Sand and freezing air whipped through the new opening as 3 armored figures breached the shadow rift, weapons already firing. Eric dove for cover behind a bulkhead as energy pulses scorched the deck where he had been sitting. Tessa launched into action, her chains glowing brilliantly as she sent her metal sphere crashing into the first intruder. The attacker's armor crumpled under the impact, but the other 2 spread out, using specialized equipment that seemed to neutralize the swirling sandstorm around them. "Cult assassins!" Tessa shouted over the roaring wind. "They want the key to the crown." Eric analyzed their opponent's movements, identifying the pattern in their coordinated attack. These weren't random bounty hunters. They moved with the precision of religious zealots, willing to die for their cause. Drawing his sword, he engaged the nearest assassin, the quantum edge slicing through hardened armor plating. The cultist responded with a series of attacks that suggested advanced neural enhancement, almost anticipating Eric's counters. Across the compartment, Tessa battled the remaining attacker, her movements hampered by the confined space. Her sphere smashed repeatedly against her opponent's energy shield, while she deflected incoming fire with her chains. Eric finally found the opening he sought, driving his blade through his opponent's chest. As the cultist fell, Eric turned to assist Tessa, only to see the remaining assassin produce a specialized weapon unlike anything he'd encountered before. The device emitted a focused pulse that somehow interacted with Tessa's chains, causing her to cry out in pain and collapse to her knees. The metal sphere dropped lifelessly to the deck. Eric calculated trajectories, adjusting for the wind interference from the hull breach, and threw his sword with lethal precision. The blade spun through the air, embedding itself in the assassin's throat. But not before the cultist fired a final shot, a crystalline projectile similar to the dart that had struck Tessa days earlier. This one found its mark in Eric's chest, penetrating deeply before he could react. Cold fire spread instantly through his veins. He staggered, collapsing against the bulkhead as his nervous system began shutting down. Tessa, recovering from the energy pulse, screamed something he couldn't understand. She crawled to his side, cradling his head as his vision began to darken. "Analysis," he managed to whisper, his tactical mind still functioning despite his failing body. "Neural toxin," she replied, tears forming in her storm-gray eyes. "Advanced, targeted specifically for human physiology." "Prognosis?" Her silence was answer enough. "I was created to stop someone like you," she whispered, genuine tears falling on his face. "To prevent anyone from claiming the crown. But I cannot watch you die, Crevon." Eric tried to speak, but his vocal cords no longer responded to commands. His heartbeat slowed dangerously as the toxin completed its work. Tessa placed her hands on either side of his face, her chains beginning to glow with an intensity that illuminated the entire compartment. "There's only one way," she said, her voice breaking. "But it means breaking the seal, violating my core purpose." Through dimming vision, Eric watched as she closed her eyes in concentration. The chains at her wrists and ankles began to unravel, revealing intricate patterns etched directly into her violet skin. "I bind my life force to yours," she whispered, pressing her forehead against his. "Not as servant, not as master, as equal." Golden light flowed from her body into his, carrying warmth that pushed back against the cold grip of the toxin. Eric felt energy surging through him, repairing cellular damage, neutralizing the poison molecule by molecule. As strength returned to his limbs, he became aware of Tessa growing heavier against him, her own life force diminishing as she poured it into him. "Enough," he tried to say, but she continued, the golden light growing brighter until it became almost blinding. With a final surge of energy that shook the ship around them, Tessa collapsed across his chest, the light fading as suddenly as it had appeared. In the eerie silence that followed, broken only by the howling of the sandstorm outside, Eric held her unconscious form against him and felt the unprecedented connection that now bound them together, something deeper than victory, deeper than obligation, something that had changed them both irrevocably. Eric awoke first, the golden energy still coursing through his veins like liquid starlight. The wound in his chest had closed completely, leaving only a crystalline scar that pulsed faintly with the rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, the sandstorm continued its assault on the damaged ship, but the howling seemed distant now, unimportant compared to the woman lying unconscious beside him. Tessa's violet skin had lost its luster, appearing ashen and dull. The chains that had always adorned her wrists and ankles had vanished entirely, revealing intricate glyphs etched directly into her flesh. Complex patterns that spiraled from her wrists, up her arms and disappeared beneath her clothing. The metal sphere that had been her constant companion lay inert on the deck, its surface now crisscrossed with hairline fractures. Eric placed his hand on her forehead, startled to find he could somehow sense her life force, diminished but stable. The connection between them went beyond physical. He could feel her presence in his mind, a subtle awareness that hadn't existed before. "Tessa," he called, gently shaking her shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly. The storm gray of her irises now contained flecks of gold that caught the emergency lighting. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Because of you." Eric helped her sit up, supporting her weight as she struggled to orient herself. "What did you do?" Tessa stared at her wrists where the chains had been, tracing the exposed glyphs with trembling fingers. "I broke the seal," she said. "Violated my primary directive. The living seal must never bind with an outsider." A bitter laugh escaped her. 3 centuries of perfect obedience, undone in a moment of weakness. "You call saving my life weakness? The Galactic Council would—" She attempted to stand but faltered, collapsing back against him. "I can't feel the sphere. The connection is gone." Eric glanced at the cracked metal orb. "Will it repair itself?" "No." Tessa's expression revealed genuine grief. "It was part of me, an extension of my being. Now it's just dead metal." She looked up at him, the gold flecks in her eyes seeming to pulse. "But something else has replaced that connection." Before Eric could respond, the ship's emergency systems activated, bathing them in red warning light. "Multiple vessels entering orbit," announced the AI. "Configuration matches Arena Enforcement Division flagship plus support craft." Eric helped Tessa to the cockpit, where the view screen confirmed their dire situation. Through gaps in the swirling sandstorm, they could see the atmospheric disturbance of inbound craft. "They've found us," Tessa said unnecessarily. "And in our current condition, we can't outrun them." Eric assessed their options, calculating survival probabilities against known variables. "The storm provides cover, but not for long." "Slip space drive?" Tessa checked the diagnostics. "Still offline. Minimum 4 hours for repairs." "Then we need another solution." Eric closed his eyes, focusing on the new energy flowing through his system. Somehow, he could sense the pathways of power, connections that extended beyond the physical realm. A memory surfaced, not his own, but Tessa's, shared through their new bond. The memory of a chamber deep beneath the central arena on Zarya, where ancient technology interfaced with the living energy of the seal. "There's another way," he said, eyes snapping open. "We can summon the crown." Tessa stared at him in shock. "That's impossible. The crown only manifests to the absolute champion after all arenas have been conquered." "But what if that's just what they told you?" Eric pushed aside debris from the attack, clearing space in the center of the cockpit. What if the true purpose was never about conquest at all, but about finding someone worthy? Someone who would use the power to create rather than dominate? Skepticism filled her expression. Even if that were true, the summoning requires the full power of the living seal. "I've broken my seal. I'm incomplete now." "Not incomplete," Eric countered. "Changed. We both are." He took her hands, guiding her to sit opposite him. "The energy flows between us now. What if that's what was always meant to happen? Not the breaking of your will, but the joining of two different perspectives." Uncertainty warred with hope in her eyes. "You think the summoning might work?" "I think we have nothing to lose by trying." The ship shuddered as something impacted nearby, the first of the enforcement vessels landing despite the storm. "They'll be through the ship's defenses in minutes," Tessa warned. Eric nodded. "Then we have minutes to change everything." He closed his eyes again, focusing on the golden energy that bound them together. Through their connection, he guided Tessa into a meditative state, their breathing synchronizing automatically. "What do I do?" she asked softly. "Remember," he instructed. "Remember the ritual you were created to perform. Show me." Images flooded his mind. Ancient ceremonies, words in languages lost to time, patterns of energy that shaped reality itself. He felt Tessa's surprise as she realized he could access her memories. "That's not possible," she whispered. "Those memories were sealed by the council." "Not anymore." Together they began the ritual, speaking words neither fully understood, yet somehow knew perfectly. The golden energy between them intensified, forming a visible nimbus that expanded outward from their joined hands. The ship's systems reacted to the energy surge, lights flickering as power was redirected. Outside, the sandstorm seemed to respond as well, swirling around their damaged vessel in increasingly complex patterns. "Something's happening," Tessa gasped, her eyes wide as the glyphs on her skin began to glow with the same golden light. The crystalline scar on Eric's chest pulsed in response, sending tendrils of energy across his skin that formed matching patterns to Tessa's glyphs. Their combined light grew until it filled the cockpit, momentarily blinding them both. In that moment of radiance, Eric heard the ship's hull breach again, enforcement agents breaking through their defenses. But the sound seemed distant, unimportant compared to the transformation occurring between them. The light condensed suddenly, collapsing into a single point that hovered between their joined hands. The point expanded, unfolding like a flower blooming in accelerated time, revealing an object that defied conventional description. The Void Crown. "By the first stars," Tessa breathed. "It actually worked." The cockpit door burst open as enforcement agents flooded in, weapons trained on them. Behind the agents stood a figure in ceremonial robes, a council representative, his face twisted in fury. "Stop this heresy immediately," he commanded. "The crown can only be claimed by—" His words died as the crown pulsed, releasing a wave of energy that froze every intruder in place. Time itself seemed to pause around them, leaving only Eric and Tessa unaffected. A voice emanated from the crown, not sound in the conventional sense, but meaning transmitted directly into their minds. "At last, the true claimant emerges." "True claimant?" Eric asked. "You mean one of us?" "I mean both, and neither." I mean the unity you have created." The crown expanded slightly, its intricate lattice reconfiguring. Within its structure, Eric could suddenly see reflections of countless worlds, some thriving, others dying, all connected through patterns he was only beginning to comprehend. For millennia, I have waited for those who understand that strength comes not from domination, but from symbiosis, not from breaking, but from building. Tessa's grip on Eric's hands tightened. But the council said, "The council perverted my purpose. They feared the truth, that creation requires balance between opposing forces. They sought to control through separation and hierarchy." The crown's rotation accelerated slightly, the light it emitted shifting through spectrums both visible and beyond. "You, human and guardian, bound not by conquest but by choice, are the pattern I have awaited." Eric processed this revelation, connecting it to everything they had learned. The arenas, the combat, the ritual of domination. It was all a test? But for what? To find those who could resist the lure of absolute power, who would choose connection over subjugation. The frozen council representative's expression remained locked in horror as the crown's light intensified once more. "Will you accept the mantle? Will you restore what was broken?" Eric looked at Tessa, finding his own questions reflected in her golden-flecked eyes. What exactly would accepting mean? Together, you would become my conduit, the healing force for a galaxy of wounds. "What about Earth?" Eric asked. "Can it be restored?" "All things are possible through balance, but know this. Accepting the mantle is irreversible. You will be changed forever." Tessa's fingers interlaced with Eric's. "I've been the living seal for 3 centuries," she said quietly. "Always separate, always guarding, never creating." She met his gaze. "What do you want, Eric Carlane of Earth?" Eric thought of his homeworld, once beautiful, now scarred and dying. He remembered his father's final words. "Find a way to bring life back to Earth, son. Not just for us, but for all that we were." "Together," he decided, squeezing her hands. "We accept the mantle together." The crown pulsed once more, then descended, expanding to encircle both of them simultaneously. As it touched them, it dissolved into millions of particles of light that spiraled around and through their bodies. Reality shifted. Eric stood on the command deck of a vessel unlike any he had ever seen, vast beyond comprehension, yet somehow intimate and familiar. Through viewports that defied physics, he could see thousands of worlds simultaneously, each one unique, each one connected to all others through patterns of energy that were now perfectly clear to him. Beside him stood Tessa, transformed yet unmistakable. Her violet skin now contained constellations, literal star patterns that shifted subtly as she moved. Her silver hair floated around her head as though underwater, strands occasionally forming symbols that conveyed meaning beyond language. "We did it," she said, her voice resonating with harmonics that hadn't existed before. "We've become the custodians." Eric nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of their new existence. Through their shared consciousness, he could sense the Galactic Council's panic as they realized what had happened, the power they had hoarded for millennia now beyond their control. "They're mobilizing the enforcement fleet," he observed without concern. Tessa's laugh carried the sound of wind through crystal. "Let them come. They cannot affect us now." With a thought, they moved their consciousness to Earth. The ruined planet hung in space, its oceans gray with pollution, its land masses scarred by centuries of exploitation and war. Eric felt a profound sadness as he witnessed the extent of the damage, far worse than even he had known. Can we really heal this? He wondered. Through their bond, he felt Tessa's certainty. Watch. Together, They extended their awareness, now enhanced by the crown's power, into the fabric of Earth itself. They could see every molecular bond, every damaged ecosystem, every intricate web of life struggling to survive. They began the work of restoration, guiding the planet's natural regenerative processes, accelerating what would have taken millions of years. Oceans cleared, atmosphere rebalanced. Dormant seeds awakened in soil that had been dead for generations. As Earth began to heal, Eric expanded his awareness to include the scattered human settlements across the galaxy, refugees from a homeworld they could no longer inhabit. He sent them a message, not in words, but in understanding. Earth was returning. They could come home. Months passed as their work continued. The Galactic Council, after one disastrous attempt to challenge their authority, had dissolved into factional conflicts. In its place, a new alliance was forming, the Union of Free Worlds, guided by principles of autonomy and cooperation rather than central control. The arenas, those ancient testing grounds perverted into spectacles of violence, were transformed into centers of learning and cultural exchange. The champions, no longer bound to combat, became ambassadors between worlds. Throughout it all, Eric and Tessa worked in perfect harmony, their consciousnesses both separate and unified. The Void Crown's power flowed through them continuously, no longer a weapon to be hoarded, but a force for regeneration that touched every corner of the galaxy. On the day Earth was officially declared restored, they stood physically at the summit of what had once been Mount Everest, now covered in lush vegetation unknown to ancient Earth. Below them stretched forests and plains teeming with life. Some species recovered from genetic archives, others new creations adapted to Earth's renewed biosphere. "It's more beautiful than I remembered," Eric said, watching a flock of birds whose feathers shifted color with the angle of sunlight. "Your memories didn't do it justice," Tessa agreed, her hand finding his. The constellations in her skin aligned momentarily with the actual stars appearing in the darkening sky above. In orbit, ships arrived carrying the first returning human colonies, people who had never seen Earth except in historical archives, now coming home to a world reborn. "They'll need guidance," Eric noted. "Earth is different now. They'll have to learn how to live in harmony with it." "They will," Tessa assured him, "just as we learned." The Shadow Rift, now transformed and expanded by the Crown's energy, waited for them in a clearing below, ready to carry them onwards to the next world in need of healing. What happens when all worlds are restored? Eric wondered. What will our purpose be then? Tessa turned to him, her storm-gray eyes with their golden flecks reflecting the sunset. "Creation never ends, Krivan. After restoration comes growth, new possibilities, new life." She smiled. "You still haven't asked what that word really means?" Eric raised an eyebrow. "I thought you said it meant tedious one." "I lied." Her smile widened. "In the ancient language of my creators, it means beloved." Eric laughed, the sound carrying across the renewed landscape. 300 years old and still terrible at flirting. "I've had limited practice," she countered, playfully shoving his shoulder. "Besides, it worked, didn't it?" As night fell completely, they made their way back to the Shadow Rift, their forms occasionally shifting between physical and energy states, an effect of the Crown's continuing influence on their biology. The ship's interior had evolved to reflect their new nature, surfaces flowing with the same lattice patterns that had characterized the Crown itself. As they entered the command deck, the view screen activated automatically, showing them thousands of worlds awaiting their attention. "What now, Krivan?" Tessa asked, her expression softening as she used the endearment openly for the first time. Eric gazed at the display, feeling not the weight of responsibility but the joy of purpose. His father had wanted Earth restored, but this was so much more. A galaxy being reborn, barriers between species dissolving, ancient wrongs being righted. Life, he answered simply, taking her hand as the shadow rift lifted from Earth's surface. Just life. The ship accelerated into the stars, leaving a trail of golden energy that lingered briefly before dissolving into the fabric of space itself, a reminder that the greatest power in existence wasn't destruction or domination, but the choice to create something new together. Dear readers, after rewriting this story 7 times, I find myself at that familiar crossroads where I must finally let it go, even when it hasn't quite reached the vision I originally had in mind. Celestial Claim, the galactic arena, evolved dramatically with each draft, sometimes veering in directions I never anticipated, occasionally leaving behind elements I'd grown attached to. There were moments when Tessa's character was more ruthless, times when Eric's backstory held darker secrets. Entire planets and civilizations existed in earlier versions that never made it to these pages. The Void Crown itself transformed from a simple MacGuffin into something with its own philosophical weight. Despite all the revisions, I still see the gaps between what I imagined and what I managed to capture. The rhythm of certain scenes feels slightly offbeat to my ear. Some world-building details remain trapped in my notes rather than finding their way into the narrative. Yet, I hope you found something to enjoy in this tale of 2 beings from different worlds finding connection across seemingly impossible divides. Perhaps you connected with Eric's determination or Tessa's journey from captivity to freedom. Maybe the action sequences pulled you in, or the quieter moments of reflection resonated with you. Tomorrow brings another story, another chance to bridge the gap between imagination and execution. I hope it will be my best work yet, or at least the best I can make it before the perfectionist in me demands yet another rewrite. Until then, thank you for reading.